to stay.
Hello and welcome back to Beyond Boards, a podcast dedicated to the actions and interests of skaters beyond skateboarding. My guest today, Dani Abulhawa, grew up near Coventry in the Midlands part of England, where she started skating in 1998. Fast forward to today, Dani is a well-established academic, having graduated her PhD from Plymouth University in 2015. She's a senior lecturer in performance at the University of Leeds, an ambassador for skateboarding charity Skatepal, a co-founder and director of non-profit Skate Manchester, the author of the book Skateboarding and Femininity, Gender, Space-Making and Expressive Movement, which was published in 2020, and is involved in many other projects. I had the opportunity to sit down with her for a nice chat early May 2023 to discuss how skateboarding has been a guiding force throughout her life and career so far. So here's my conversation with Dani. I hope you'll enjoy it. Let's maybe start with you just telling me about how you started skating. So I read or I listened to interviews of you, I don't remember where I heard this, but that you grew up in Rugby, close to Birmingham, not too far from there, in the Midlands.
Yeah.
And that's where you started skating, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so Rugby is in the middle of England. It's a market town, so it's quite a small place. And I used to go to school. I lived very close to the town centre. Mm-hmm. And I used to come home and basically would often go out into walk around town after school and sort of just explore the urban space, or sort of it's an urban space, but it's kind of like sort of semi-rural space.
Okay.
And I feel like I've told this story quite a few times to different people, so people might have heard this anyway, but I went into WH Smith's, which is a newsagent's, and
right.
I saw this image on the cover of a magazine on the rack of a man performing a skateboarding trick, and he was kind of hovering above the ground, and he was lit by a street light, and I was just very drawn to this image. It was it really appealed to me, and I sort of started reading through the magazine and was really fascinated by this activity of skateboarding, which I hadn't really much knowledge of at all. I'd probably seen people skateboarding maybe on the TV or maybe even a little bit around Rugby. But anyway, so I asked my parents, I loved this magazine and I read through it a lot and bought it, regularly. And then I asked my parents to buy me a skateboard for my 16th birthday, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was a company called, I probably ordered it from Roller Snakes, which is a sort of old UK-based, I think, company.
Yeah, that rings a bell, yeah.
Yeah, and we ordered it as a complete, so they sent the skateboard and it was already assembled, and then I put the skateboard on the floor of my parents' living room, which was carpeted, and kind of put on a 411 video, which I'd ordered at the same time as well.
Yeah.
And kind of basically started to learn to ollie and in the living room.
Was that 401 video, was it like a kind of trick tip video, or was it a regular kind of 401 video?
I can't remember. I think it might have actually been a beginner's guide to skateboarding even. I think they maybe produced something like that, but I can't remember.
What about the magazine? You just mentioned seeing that magazine at the newsstand, in the bookshop. I think it was a Sidewalk magazine, right?
Magazine.
But do you remember who was skating on the cover?
You know how your brain is so faulty, your memory is so faulty? I have a feeling, I keep thinking that it might have been Damien Ince, who was a skateboarder from Northampton, but I'm not sure if I'm just remembering that wrong.
Okay.
I'm not sure who it was. I did actually, some years after, I got hold of a copy of the very Sidewalk that I had found, this one. Uh-huh. But now I don't know where it's gone, and so I did know who it was, but for now I can't remember.
Yeah, that's okay, no worries. Yeah, I'll try to track it down. If you said it was 98, right?
It was, I reckon it was something like April or May, because my birthday's in August, so that would have meant a couple of months. I would have probably engaged with it for a couple of months before asking for
So we're going to talk about that later, but I saw something that I thought was interesting and I wanted to ask you to comment maybe on it. In the intro of your book, Skateboarding and Femininity, I'm going to quote you on this. You said, I am not a typical skateboarder, and it has taken me a long time to become comfortable with being slightly out of place and to locate my own body and practice within this culture. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting because, like, what did you mean kind of by a typical skateboarder? Did you mean like skill-wise or the way you approached it, or just by the fact that you were a girl and probably there weren't many girls around you that were skating at that time? Like, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things. First and foremost, yeah, it was the real complete absence of other girls and women skateboarding when I started. Because I lived near to Northampton, so I skated a lot in a skate park called Radlands, which no longer exists, but was a very famous sort of skate park, landmark skate park. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing, there was one other girl at the time that I was skating who would kind of regularly use the park. And then I remember seeing one other woman there during the time. So, I mean, really very few.
Right.
So that was part of it. But also, I suppose, yeah, the way that I approach skating, because I've always been attracted to it as an activity, but I never really connected a lot with maybe like a sort of dominant style that I was seeing in the 90s or that my friends were performing. Mm-hmm. I've always really been attracted to, I guess, a lot more of the sort of flowing style and also more freestyle skateboarding. But freestyle wasn't something that I was exposed to either when I was 16. So it was a lot of street skating and what I would consider to be quite linear use of spaces and very repetitive.
Standardized somewhat.
Yeah, so in all of those ways that you mentioned, felt a little bit kind of out of place. Like I'd found this thing that I had this very strong gut connection to in a weird way, but there were all these aspects of it which I didn't feel I particularly fitted into or that didn't necessarily meet my desires.
And was there a point where you felt a bit more comfortable with this? And can you recall a point in time where you kind of felt, okay, like now I feel a bit more comfortable in my skin as a skater and I feel a bit more welcome within this skate community? Or
honestly, it didn't happen until a really long time, after. And what I would say is that I sort of stuck skateboarding out to some degree for about 10 or 15 years before I met. So I met a woman called Laura Powell, who is...
Yes, I saw her name in your book a couple of times, yeah.
Yeah, so folk who've been skating for a long time in the northwest of England probably will have come across Laura at some point. She's like, you know, a lifer, a veteran skateboarder. And I got to know her actually through Sidewalk magazine had an online forum.
Oh, yeah.
Which was quite a fun and contentious space in lots of ways. Okay. But she used to post on there and I used to post on there and I kind of got to know her. And then when I moved to Manchester, because she's from that area, sort of from the north, in Lancashire, we ended up sort of meeting up. And that was a bit of a revelation to me because it was like having a mentor suddenly. And it was this mentor who obviously looked a lot more like I did, you know, was coming from a woman's perspective. Sure. And someone who'd really, she's about 10 years older than me, I think, and she'd obviously encountered all of the same kinds of challenges that I had, but she was just a lot more confident than I was and was able to hold space for herself in a really inspiring way. So I can remember there used to be a skate park in Manchester called Central, and it was run by a bunch of skaters. I'm not sure who they were, and it was one of those like really quite scary skate parks to go into, or from my perspective,
intimidating.
Very intimidating. And when I can remember going there with Laura and she just saying to me, take your turn, it's your turn, you've paid your money to be in here, you've got every right to be here just as much as everyone else. Yeah. And that was, having that kind of connection with someone who was really willing to advocate for me in spaces and really saw me and understood the challenges that I had faced, really, I guess, in trying to get into skating. It was just that was really wonderful.
So I wanted to ask you also about like your academia background. So I read that you did a degree in drama and then a master's degree in contemporary art, and a bit later you did like a PhD, and now you're actually working at university in Leeds, I believe.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could take me kind of through your journey with academia, like especially, I think I heard it was probably in one of the Pushing Borders panel talks. You said something along the lines of that you were basically not necessarily attracted to academia or studying for a long time when you were younger, and but it kind of just happened, and you obviously got very interested in it, and you're now working as a researcher and everything. And so, yeah, can you tell me about like kind of the pivotal moment that got you into academia, maybe?
Yeah, I wasn't a good student at school. What I will start by saying is I've always been like quite bright and, you know, generally like interested in things and quite curious, but really never connected to the school system in lots of ways, and was quite a disruptive student just because I was often, I think, like looking back on it, I guess I'm maybe a bit more of a kinesthetic learner. I need to be doing things, and there were aspects about the authority of school that I struggled with a lot.
Sure.
So as a result, you know, I wasn't like, the school I went to never channeled me into going to university. I don't think any of my teachers expected that would be a route that I would go down. But I did end up at university. I went to university in Northampton, which is, you know, it's considered a sort of, it's an sort of polytechnic university. It's not like a very prestigious university. And I kind of scraped my way in there with really quite poor results. But when I got to Northampton, when I got to university there, I was suddenly in this very different sort of learning space where thinking for yourself and challenging authority was suddenly what was available to me. And that really appealed to me. I was like, okay, so school has been awful, but this is the kind of learning that I can get on board with, because like I get to argue about stuff, I get to discuss things, I can think for myself. And that was like amazing. And then I studied drama because, you know, it was a subject I was always really interested in. And then I met one of my tutors in the second year, who is now, well, I would consider him a good very good friend of mine now anyway, but Lee Miller and his wife, Bob Worley, both of whom are absolutely incredible theatre academics, performance academics.
Okay.
He taught me when he came to work at Northampton in the second year of my degree, and he really encouraged me, because I wouldn't say, I mean, most of my family are sort of working class, I would say. I mean, my dad was like an immigrant, and so the idea of a class structure in Palestinian society doesn't translate exactly into sort of UK context. But my dad came over to the UK to study, but the whole of like my mum's side of the family are very working class, and so I grew up in an environment where, you know, my dad really wanted me to sort of like develop and go on to university because he'd had that opportunity, but it wasn't necessarily something that it wasn't necessarily something that was considered necessary or, you know, important across like my entire family. So going on beyond an undergraduate degree was like wild. You know, it was a completely
unheard of or
well, yeah, it was like, why, you know, how would that happen? And I can remember Lee saying to me in my third year, you know, have you ever thought about doing a PhD? And I was like, what? Like, you know, I was kind of like, how is that even what, you know, it was just like something that completely blew my mind. But it was like, wow, this person really wants to invest in me. They think I'm capable of doing something like that. And I think in hindsight, it really made me realize how important it is to have people that are looking out for you and want you to do well and kind of like want you to develop and can kind of like help to support you in those ways. And I really feel like that whole story is reflected in my skateboarding story, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
You need people to kind of like hold space for you, to look out for you, to advocate for you, to push you forward. Or most people do. Most people don't have like an intrinsic sort of like drive where they're kind of very confident and can go and do things.
Yeah.
And I think we take that for granted as well. I think like in some families or in some social settings or whatever, people might have that and don't necessarily recognise it. But like when you don't have it, of course you don't know what you don't have either.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so he really sort of encouraged me to do a PhD. And then when I was like thinking about that, I was kind of like, what would I do this on? And he started actually encouraging me to mine the experience I'd had as a skateboarder. And I was like, yeah, it is something that's really bothered me. It's something that's really stood out to me. And so I wanted to explore why it was that fewer women participate in this kind of form of play in urban spaces. And I wanted to, you know, delve into that. And suddenly I was in this space, this critical space that I'd had access to through sort of education in drama and performance and dance to sort of examine that. So that's kind of how it happened. And then, I mean, after you do a PhD, there's only so many career avenues open to you, I guess. And so I sort of like dropped into then, you know, teaching and working for a university. So it's not something that I had ever aspired to. It's just something that I kind of like developed into.
Yeah, it organically kind of happened. And so I think you completed your PhD in 2015, right? Around that time.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to complete it? Because I know in France, usually a PhD lasts for about 3 years, but sometimes it could last a bit longer, like 5-6 years sometimes. But how long did it take you to finish yours?
Yeah, I did it in 5 years. I did it part-time because I had to work alongside doing it, of course. And so 5 years in total, yeah.
What kind of work were you doing aside from the PhD? Were you already like working in a university, or what were you doing?
Yeah, so at that point, after I finished my master's, I just needed to earn money really badly. And so I basically sent out my CV to lots of universities to try and get little bits of, you know, temporary teaching.
Sure.
And so I would travel around the country and go and do one-off bits and pieces here and there. And then I managed to get a short contract in a university in Chester, and so I worked there part-time and did a little bit of work at Northampton as well. So it was kind of like hourly paid lecturing basically, and some other stuff as well. So I've done like tons and tons of jobs.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you could tell me about like your involvement with Skatepal now, because I believe you started working with them in 2015, that same year that you finished your PhD. And so you just mentioned earlier, I think, is it your dad who's from Palestine?
Yeah, so my dad was born in occupied Palestine in 1955. He grew up in Jerusalem, so that side of my family still live on the Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem, very close to the Old City and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I grew up visiting Palestine with my family, but never really sort of strongly connected to it for lots of reasons, one of which was that we never learnt fluent Arabic, so there was like a little bit of a language barrier. Obviously, it's a really tricky area to visit at times, so like there's you know, there's lots of problems there, and so there was all sorts of things that kept me from it. And while I was writing up my PhD, Israel were implementing Operation Protective Edge, which was another military incursion into Gaza, which was devastating. I can't remember the exact numbers, something like, I don't know, 2,000 people were injured, lots and lots and lots of people died. And it was a really distressing time, and I just remember being sat in the library and kind of like writing up my PhD and sort of looking through the news in between. And I remember I was scrolling through Instagram, and Sidewalk magazine, funnily enough, had posted a video of this Welsh skateboarder, Chris Jones, performing a backside board slide on a rail outside a shop in Ramallah. And you could tell very much that it was like, it wasn't the UK. It was like, you know, there was sort of Arabic writing on the shop, I think. And, you know, it's kind of obvious. So it stopped me in my tracks, and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? People skating in Ramallah. And, you know, I visited Palestine with my family on trips, and I'd taken my skateboard as well and sort of skated around a little bit, but never connected with any skateboarders there. So I was just fascinated by the idea that skaters from the UK were going over and skating in Palestine. So I ended up getting in touch with Charlie Davis, who's
the founder.
Obviously, you know. And through sort of making friends with him and learning more about the charity, I ended up going out in the summer of 2015, I think it was, to help build the Asira Shamalia skate park, which is in the north of the West Bank. And that really was a defining and life-changing experience in lots of ways. It completely reconnected me with my family and with Palestine, and kind of it completely shifted as well my sense of what was important to me, or like not shifted so much, but kind of recalibrated.
Sure.
And it also kind of reconnected me with skateboarding, because at that point I'd sort of given up a little bit on skating. I was kind of like, you know, I've been really trying with this, and I really want to kind of like keep going with it, and I really enjoy it, but at the same time it's getting harder and harder as I get older, you know, and friends that I used to skate with disappear. It becomes more and more difficult for a woman in her 30s opportunities at that point to like kind of just go out in the street and skate. And so I was kind of like petering out a bit. And then suddenly I met all these people who were like more like me, these wonderful, interesting, inspiring people like Charlie and Chris.
Yep.
And my friend Doug, who I met who's from Sheffield, and just like who were really thoughtful, had a real like social justice motivation in life, who approached skateboarding in a much more sort of like relaxed and fun way, who were kind of more aware of like the need to be critical socially, and kind of like who I could chat with about stuff. And it was absolutely amazing experience. And it kind of like made me realize that like I can find a place, I can find a way to be part of this activity that I really love, and I also can sort of be here in Palestine and find a way to be here.
Yeah. I think I don't know if you keep doing that, but I read that you used to go there every year after this first year in 2015. There's been COVID, so obviously between 2020 and now you probably didn't go as much, but when was the last time you went?
Yeah, so I think it was 2019, or it might have been 2018, but basically, yeah, when COVID happened, it was not possible.
Right.
And then I've not been able to get there since, because after sort of COVID, then I got pregnant and I had a baby. And so for all of those reasons, I've not been able to go back there, but I'm absolutely desperate to go back. I really want to go back there. It's weird because I don't know whether this is something that is more in my head, like I've made it up and it's like, it's more of a psychological thing. But I just feel so much like I want to be there, and like I have a strong, I feel very like going there and being back there is really important. And like, obviously, you know, like I say, half my family are there, so like there is an obvious connection, but it's just something about the place that I find very warm and generative and inspiring.
For sure. And I saw that you're an ambassador for Skatepal, and I was wondering, like, what exactly does that kind of entail, or like, what exactly do you do for them? Like, do you participate in events like in the UK or elsewhere to kind of talk about it and maybe, I don't know, raise funds for it or something? Like, how are you involved with them as an ambassador?
Yeah, so exactly, doing things like talks, sometimes organising events myself as well. I've done a couple of events in Manchester, which is the city that I usually live in. Not there at the moment, but... And yeah, so spreading word about the charity, informing people about it, encouraging people to donate or to buy merchandise, because that keeps the charity going. Yeah, they're the main things really. And yeah, being an ambassador for Skatepal I was asked by Charlie, which was really lovely, and it was an easy thing to agree to, because I feel so grateful to the charity for what they do, and I think that it's really great and quite important work, and so it's easy for me to do it because I'm quite happy to talk about that and spread it.
Yeah, for sure. And in the Skateboarding and Femininity book, I think you mentioned at times that you did some interviews with people over there, like parents or kids that were, you know, coming to skate in the skate parks that have been built by Skatepal and everybody. Yeah, I was wondering, like, how has been this experience of, you know, going there since 2015, basically, and seeing this scene develop and, you know, skate parks opening and more skaters, you know, getting better, like Aram, who's now one of the main guys over there and who's like a really good skater, and like, how has it been, this whole experience of seeing it grow? Because you were there not at the very beginning, but quite early stages still.
Yeah, it's been amazing, and obviously with regards to the skate park in Asira, that's been particularly amazing because I have seen that from literally like there not being a skate park there, and then like obviously seeing people start to use it. It's wonderful. I'm always fascinated by, you know, the new people that you meet whenever you go there, but like also how much those people from years previous are still kind of visiting the park or like have some sort of connection to it. And how much the charity is growing. It's absolutely amazing that Aram's doing the work that he's doing there. And I think that, well, I mean, I've written about this before, but the way that Skatepal have operated there, I think is a really good model, because there's a lot of support for the local community. It wasn't just a case of sort of like building a skate park and then like see you later. It's like, it's about a commitment to that community.
Right.
And yeah, a consistency. And I'm trying to, Amber Edmondson as...
from SBGV.
Yeah, I can't remember where I've read it, or I think it was in an interview. She was talking about, showing up and the importance of consistency and being there for a community and like being there every week, or whatever it is to participate. And of course, she's absolutely right. And I think like that's one of the good things about what Skatepal have done there, in that they're sort of there every year and they're really trying to kind of maintain that support. And that the important thing in a Palestinian context is that, because it wouldn't necessarily be ideal in another kind of context, but it's important there because people can't leave. And because the idea of a sort of international exchange is very tricky. So, by people being there, they're actually creating a solidarity space where people can travel over, take part, people can meet each other and like learn from each other back and forth. But also people who are visiting can see the situation on the ground for themselves, which is really important. They can make their own decisions about what's happening there and kind of the politics of that area. So
yeah. And so you will probably go back there in the near future, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll manage it this year. Obviously now me and my husband and our daughter, we've got like, it's even more complicated now to take people.
Sure.
But I'm really determined that in the next sort of 12 months we'll go.
Cool.
I'd actually really like to live there for a bit. I'd really like to go and spend a longer time. Yeah.
That would be interesting. Yeah. I'm jumping to kind of another subject, but linked to everything we're talking about. But I wanted to ask you just your like impressions of participating in the Pushing Borders events, because that's where I first heard about you and your work. And I was just wondering, like, now that it's been a few years since the last edition in Malmö in 2019, how do you kind of reflect on it now? And also, how impactful do you feel these events have been?
I think that Pushing Borders was a breakthrough moment from my perspective on ushering in this new, I'm going to say like a new era of skateboarding culture, really.
Sure, yeah.
And it wasn't like down to any one or two or three people. It was like there seems to be this convergence of different people across different continents.
Disciplines.
Yeah, who are all sort of asking more of skateboarding and people involved in skateboarding and kind of bringing a kind of critical perspective to skateboarding practice in a really interesting way. And that, I think that the Pushing Borders team, which includes a lot of people, really managed to ride that wave and to bring those things together. So, I mean, my feeling about the first Pushing Borders was it was just such an interesting and affirming and important space to open up. I'm not saying that all the conversations were necessarily perfect or that it couldn't have been better or any of those things, but it was so important, I think, to do that, to have that kind of moment of like raising this zeitgeist of like what is needed in skateboarding. And so I think it was brilliant in that sense. And it's a shame, it's a pity that the format and the labour involved and resources needed for it were not sustainable for the core team that were working on it. And because it was a great series of events, but at the same time I think it was this like important catalyst. And I think it's actually given birth to a lot of different sorts of events and initiatives, and even things like this podcast, for example, which perhaps might not have manifested. So, and I think it's important for there to be lots of different voices and for things not to sort of like come from a centralized, this idea like of a group of people who functioned as a catalyst to set something off that created this distributed network of really critical, exciting, interesting people looking at skateboarding. To me, is the most exciting and wonderful thing. It doesn't need to be this one event run by a few people that just repeats and repeats and repeats over and over again. We don't need to repeat the same practices and the same rhythms of previous generations. I think it was important in that sense.
I also wanted to ask you, I saw that you were involved with Skate Manchester. I saw that you were the director, actually. I don't know if you still are. I was like, oh, you also do this? Like, how do you do all of these different things? It's crazy. But
I'm one of the directors. There's 3 directors. So there's Christian Berger, who's my husband, and Patrick Critch, who's an absolutely amazing, wonderful human being and skateboarder who lives in Manchester.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's the 3 of us. We started Skate Manchester because we wanted to advocate for skateboarding in the city, because Manchester's a really big and amazing city with probably, I would say, one of the worst provisions for skateboarding that you could...
Okay.
Considering its size, you know, and the sort of the scene and the history of the skateboarding scene in that city, it's just quite shocking, really. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to like try and help to develop that, but also the 3 of us were all really turned on to social justice issues, were involved or participated in pushing borders, and so we also wanted to address issues around inclusivity within skateboarding and within public urban spaces. So that's kind of where that came from, and we've been trying to do that now we started Skate Manchester in 2019, and we've managed to achieve a few really great things. We set up skateboarding sessions in an area of Manchester which is where we all live, actually, is kind of in Moss Side, but with like a community there that haven't been involved a lot with skateboarding, but the kids absolutely love it. So that's been really lovely. We've also been trying to campaign for a free indoor space for skateboarding.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
We managed to acquire a spot, and we got some funding. We crowdfunded for the space, and then the space was like taken back, and so it's been really hard to kind of get anything moving on that, and we're all trying to do that with having full-time jobs. So to be honest, it's a very, very, very slow moving thing.
Sure, I understand.
But we will continue to develop it. It's just going to move very slowly.
Okay. This is kind of a random question, but I was interested in asking you about this. You did an interview with this guy, Chris Alton, not too long ago. And you said something that I thought was interesting. I'm going to quote you. So you said, "There's this perception, I don't know how true it is really, that most skaters don't think about it and just get on with it. But I think that skaters do think very deeply about what they're doing. They tweak and try different things. We all do that in slightly different ways. But it's interesting that there's a dominant mode of behavior where we have to pretend like we don't care and we're not really thinking about it too much." And that kind of echoed something. I think it was John Dahlquist from Bryggeriet. When I interviewed him, he told me something about the kids who are going to Bryggeriet. And he told me like before, like in the past, skating was about the skill, maybe the technicality of the tricks and kind of how wide your selection of tricks is or something. And today it's more about style, about having, you know, a very strong identity basically on your skateboard. And so I was just wondering, like, where do you think this comes from? Kind of this, I don't know if you can call it a fake nonchalant way of skating or of some sort, you know, like why do we celebrate kind of this effortless, at least in appearance, way of skating rather than, you know, a highly trained kind of version of skating?
So it's funny that you bring that up, because I think we were talking about this. I did an interview with Anthony Pappalardo as well, just like a few days ago. He's just published it today, actually, I think.
Oh, okay, nice. I'll check it out.
Yeah, I think we were actually touching on a lot of this, because we were talking about the implicit and the explicit in skateboarding, and how skateboarding is all about cool. It's all about being cool.
Yeah.
And cool is all about having an implicit knowledge and understanding of rules and structures and things, so you don't need to kind of overly explain anything or like bring anything too much out in the open, but you just sort of get on with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that skateboarders' like obsession with that sort of nonchalance and maybe not bringing their knowledge too much to the surface or making it too much explicit is about it remaining in that level of kind of coolness of like, well, this is what I do, it's not that important. But of course it's all happening there. That's what I think anyway about that. And in some ways, you know, that's wonderful. But I think that bringing things to the surface and talking about the way that we do things, or making those knowledges or ways of moving and approaches more explicit, is the only way to bring more people in and to develop more from skateboarding as well. Because when you keep things at that kind of like more implicit level, it means that the only people who can like really learn and develop from that are other people that get it.
Yeah.
And the other people that are kind of able to access that.
I thought it was interesting, yeah, because I definitely see this more in skating today. Like, I don't know if you watch many skate videos nowadays, but like when you watch videos from today, like on Thrasher or Free Skate Mag or wherever, people are definitely paying attention to style rather than, trying this super hard trick, basically. I mean, some people, of course, are trying to do NBDs and trying to, explore new ways of skating. But like overall, it seems like people are really focused on trying to execute something in the most cool way, as you said, or like
I mean, and that's kind of really wonderful to me because it's all about performance, and that's obviously my field, and I really... The idea of making something look aesthetically a particular way because, that's how you want to express yourself and that's how you want to perform is really interesting. On the flip side of that, and this comes from, obviously, the field of performance, we have somatic practice, so practices that are all about like how it feels inside, internally, and how we kind of engage with the world, how we engage with the activity on a kind of like a much deeper mind-body relation. So I think those two things can sometimes be incompatible as well. Like wanting something to look a particular way generally means like the development of like technique and a sort of outward appearance of it. Yeah. But we shouldn't lose sight as well of like the joy and the benefits of doing an activity and like feeling into it and feeling the way that it feels.
Yeah.
And what we can get from that as well, even if it looks crappy. If that makes sense. So like I both appreciate focus on style because I think that's really interesting, but at the same time
you shouldn't lose sight of
exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think Leo Valls actually talked to me about this because he obviously has a way of skating that's quite unique. And I think sometimes people like to kind of talk shit on it or something, like especially a few years ago when he was kind of experimenting with like power slides and stuff like that at a time where people weren't really doing that stuff too much and like kind of disregarded his skating because it was just not in the norm. But actually, I think he just followed his like gut feeling of this feels good, this is what I enjoy doing, this brings me pleasure, this is how I like to skate, and I don't care like if it looks cool or if people validate it, like I don't need anybody's approval.
Definitely, yeah, that's wonderful, yeah.
To bring it to the book, Skateboarding and Femininity, I wanted to ask you like how this project started and how did the idea for the book kind of arrive and how long did it take you to write it? And then I have a few questions of some things that I read in it. But yeah, tell me about like how you started working on this. Because I feel like this subject of skateboarding and femininity or like gender in general is something that you've been working on or around for quite a long time. So
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the book has been percolating for, like, most of the time I've been skating, I guess.
Sure.
Like, I feel like it came out of that, all of that. And wanting to write something about women's contributions to skateboarding, but also to unpack ideas around skateboarding, the gendering of skateboarding. Because there's the issue of skateboarding being more men and boy dominated, which is historically is the case and still is to a large extent, although things are obviously different now. But there's that, and then I wanted to sort of like move from that into kind of thinking about how do we think of skateboarding, the activity or the physical activity of skateboarding, as a gendered activity, or like how might we start to unpack and explore that. And so the first part of the book is about looking at different kinds of approaches to skateboarding historically, but also the ways in which groups of women or non-binary people and how they've contributed to the development of skateboarding.
Right.
And kind of unpacking that history a bit more. And then the book looks at feminism, and the idea of feminism and how that intersects with skateboarding or relates to skateboarding. And then I look a little bit at like skateboarding kind of tricks and approaches to skateboarding and the ways that they are gendered through the way that people articulate them, but kind of trying to problematize that a little bit as well. And then thinking about this idea of the difference between, I guess, what we were just talking about, which is like style and aesthetics compared with like a kind of more somatic approach, and how we might look at skateboarding as something that could be beneficial to the mind body as much as it is an aesthetic activity that we can look at and, you know, think is interesting and skillful. And that move away from the sort of like the idea of a sport or an aesthetics into a kind of more mind-body somatic practice was related to gender because of the ways that sports, if you think about the concept of sports, tend to focus an activity around a particular sort of particular types of masculinity, whereas the field of dance, which is where somatic practices are rooted, is much more associated with the feminine, with femininity. And so that was kind of the idea of that that progression. So the book covers quite a few different things. And actually, although it was researched over probably about like a year or so, and like I say, all of the things that filtered into it came from much, you know, experiences much longer ago. But then I wrote it quite quickly. I wrote the whole thing in about probably 3 months. 4 months. So,
oh wow.
Yeah.
And how was it like received by your peers, your friends, or in skateboarding in general, or like in academia? Like how was it received? Yeah.
I mean, it's been received pretty well. Like I've had some really nice feedback on it, some really positive feedback. I haven't had a lot of like criticism on it, which I would really welcome as well. And I'm sure there's lots of issues with it. It's hard to get like really thoughtful, critical feedback, I think, because, you know, I guess also it's tricky as well within skateboarding because a lot of us are friends. Yeah. And so, you know, it's hard to kind of be real with each other, but you know,
sure. Yeah.
But like, as far as I'm concerned, it expands my arena, expands everyone's arena to like have those kinds of conversations. So yeah. So if you have any criticisms, you're very welcome to raise them.
Not really, unfortunately, but I'll have to read it again to maybe try to find something to say bad things about or something.
No, but I mean, it's pretty safe. It's not like
No. There's nothing too controversial.
I could have probably pushed a bit more as well, but yeah.
No, I thought it was super interesting, and I just wrote down a couple of things that I thought were interesting, at least that kind of caught my attention and that I wanted you to maybe address a bit more. But you talked about J.D. Salinger, who wrote this novel, The Catcher in the Rye. So it says basically the image of the catcher in the rye that Caulfield keeps returning to in the novel represents a kind of perpetual child intent on ensuring other children don't fall off the cliff and into the realms of adulthood. And also a bit later, you mentioned something that I thought was interesting about Lance Mountain and the Bones Brigade. And he got married at that time in his like early 20s. And apparently Powell Peralta wasn't too comfortable with him kind of, you know, saying out loud that he was getting married because it was like it would make him an adult, basically. And to be a skater, you needed to embody kind of a child. And so, yeah, I just thought that was interesting. I never really thought about that. And obviously today it's different because at the time, like in the 80s, skaters would kind of, you know, retire in their early 20s or mid 20s or something. And obviously today we have pro skaters that are nearly 50 or something, or sometimes above that. So it's a different kind of landscape for skateboarding. But yeah, I was wondering if you could kind of tell me a bit more about this idea of like skaters being just children or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, without wanting to, I don't know, maybe be too philosophical about it, I think if you look at skateboarding and the way that skateboarding culture operates, I think that there's this focus on this like Peter Pan idea, which is this like perpetual childhood concept, and this idea of the freedom that engenders and the joy and the fun of it and the lack of responsibility, all of those things which on one hand are great, really great, and we all want that. Ugh, I look at my daughter and I'm like, why can't I just be a child again? Like not have these responsibilities. And then on the flip side of that, of course, that raises lots of challenges. If you think about how skateboarding has been as a culture, I just think you can see that trope again and again. It's this idea of like, you know, it's not my responsibility. Oh, like I'm just saying these things and I'm saying these words that are maybe like really homophobic, but it's like, I didn't mean it because or just, you know, whatever. It's just me talking. You know, at some point we all have to take responsibility for the things that we do and say in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's, that shift of era that we were talking about earlier in this conversation, precipitated perhaps in some ways by like pushing borders or or certainly the confluence of that idea. I really think that we've seen this like adulting shift in skateboarding.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereby like a lot of people who were skateboarding in the 80s and 70s and 80s are now like much older people. They've had all this life experience and they're kind of obviously very much become adults anyway.
Yeah.
But like on a philosophical level, I think skateboarding has gone through that transition of like being within that childhood realm and then kind of like coming to terms more with like the responsibilities of being in the world.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I wanted to have you comment on was you mentioned in the book a quote from Sarah Merle interview that she did with Jan Cleaver and Tom Bodwood. So she said, "In a time where skateboarding is so accepted and trendy, I feel like female skaters are the only real underground skaters left, facing many of the obstacles older skaters still romanticize, like being an outcast, being different and or underground, etc." And I thought it was interesting. I don't remember if you say when this interview happened. I guess it wasn't that long ago. But do you feel like it's still kind of the case today? Because I feel like women in skateboarding are, of course, much more present, and that's a great thing. It's still not quite at a balance with men, of course, not even close. But like obviously, it's a different landscape again for women in skateboarding today. And I don't feel like girl skaters or women skaters are necessarily underground anymore. At least that's my impression of it. But like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think I wouldn't say that either. I think I honestly don't know how to think about the idea of an underground in skateboarding now. In some ways, the things that are coming to my mind are these kind of groups like, what's the name of that group that kind of skate in like masks and stuff? Are they Barrier Cult? That's it.
I've heard about them.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, well, I would think of them as like, that's kind of like the underground, these kind of like much more
niche kind of skating.
Niche, yeah. Folks like that, I guess, are kind of the real, maybe the more of the underground now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was an interesting quote, that one, and that idea. I'm not sure when it was that was published, but I'm going to guess it was probably about 10 years ago, maybe. And things are changing quite fast in skateboarding, aren't they? It feels like every year or so, new things are kind of coming out. So, but yeah, honestly, I'd like to know more about skateboarding underground, actually, and kind of like what's going on.
What does it mean today? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
also you published this book right before the Olympics. Well, a year before because they got postponed to 2021. But obviously it's kind of changed a bit the landscape of skating as well. Not profoundly or anything, but like it definitely was a pivotal moment in skateboarding history at least. But it's I don't know if skateboarding is underground at all anymore, basically. I
was just about to say, I think we might have excavated the whole mine. I think we might have uncovered everything. Yeah, which is sad. It's kind of sad in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, but it's still cool, still interesting. So,
yeah.
So also I'm changing gears a bit, but I wanted to ask you about this project that you're involved with your husband, I believe. This company called Plant Ecology Beyond Land. I thought that was very interesting. Can you tell me about this project and how it all started?
So my husband Christian grew up in Swansea. He actually was born in Munich in Germany, so he's German, but he grew up in Swansea. So he grew up surfing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I met him, because I, as you know, grew up in the Midlands, so was nowhere near the coast, or not very close to the coast. So I started surfing when I met him, and love surfing. It was wonderful, even in this country, which is just cold all the time, obviously, and that's the best time to surf is in the winter. But so he comes from a science background, so he studied physics, and that's kind of more in that field. So we both were kind of thinking about wanting to pivot our skills towards something that would be beneficial within the climate emergency context, because there's a need for all of us to do something and to respond. And so I think that was where that idea came from. So Christian had been reading a lot about seaweed and the potentials of seaweed, because it's a really protein rich vegan food.
Mm-hmm.
You can use it for bioplastics, medicines, biofuel. It can be used as a flood defense, big sea kelp farms in the sea, kelp barriers. It can be used for all sorts of things. It's a really incredible material and food. But it's not typically eaten in the British Isles, despite there's actually a real history of Celtic use of and eating of seaweed.
Okay.
In the British Isles, but like it's kind of died out, and there's not really much of an industry in Wales. There's a little bit of an industry in Scotland and Ireland, but Wales is not so much at all.
Okay.
And most of the seaweed that we use and buy comes from East Asia, of course, like where the seaweed kind of like farming is much more established, developed, exactly.
Okay.
So there's a kind of renewed interest in seaweed aquaculture industry on the British Isles. And so we decided we wanted to sort of get into that. And so we established Plant Ecology Beyond Land with the aim of like trying to enter into that sector and support it in some way and get involved. And what we came to was the idea of the need for, because we don't have like working boats and we're not able to skip a boat, so we can't really do like sea farming in that sense.
Okay.
But what we could do and what we started to explore was creating a hatchery, which is it started out as a shipping container, and we seed kelp onto line and then we sell it to sea farmers and they put it out to sea and grow seaweed.
Okay.
And then that sort of developed. So because of like Christian's like physics and engineering background, he started creating environmental monitoring equipment as well, because we recognize that there's a need to understand the conditions in particular areas so that you can grow the best seaweed and also make sure that it's not having a negative environmental impact.
Yes, okay.
And so we've started doing a lot more work on environmental monitoring. But when we conceived the business, we always had in mind that there would be like an artistic strand, a kind of like creative strand and a community focused strand to the work, because we were also thinking about the idea of creating a business that doesn't follow the sort of like old fashioned structures of business, but like actually looks more holistically at how you create businesses and integrate them into locales and support local infrastructures. So the idea was that we would do this like seaweed work, but we would also be communities focused and in terms of working with community, but also looking at how to support the development of the seaweed industry by bringing more local people on board. And that was kind of like more where I was coming from in terms of bringing my skills to this project.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm working on at the moment is taking quite a long time to get there, but I'm working on a funding proposal that will involve using skate parks and skateboarding activity as a way of engaging people with ocean ecology.
Okay.
And sort of seaweed farming and seaweed, including seaweed. Because skate parks, of course, are like monuments to the sea. They're designed from the idea that like the sort of transitions are supposed to be like pools and like waves and...
Right, yeah.
They come out of this like Californian landscape. So that's currently where I'm at, is kind of trying to explore that. And it builds a little bit on projects like Briggeria in Malmo and their idea of like kind of bringing education with skateboarding and kind of exploring what the intersection of those two things. But it's also about using existing skate park spaces in ways that they haven't previously been used before. And trying to engage young people outside of a sort of conventional classroom.
Okay, that sounds like a super interesting project, yeah. So you haven't yet organized like a gathering in a skate park to kind of have a conference or like a talk about this whole project?
No, it would be good to do that. We're actually, in July, we're doing a pilot with a skate park in Holyhead, which is in North Wales, on the Isle of Anglesey, which will involve some school children from Holyhead High School and also some of the local skaters. I've been in touch with like one sort of skater in particular who's like a real veteran in that area and makes a lot of film scene videos in Holyhead. And so through my connection with him, he's called Mike Sanderson and his company is called Floppy Skateboarding. You should check out some of his videos, they're nice.
Oh yeah, haven't heard of it.
Yeah, so
what is it called? Floppy
I think it's Floppy Skateboarding or Floppy Skateboards or something.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, so hopefully in July we're sort of gonna pilot this and get some people together and see what they think and have a chat about it. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that.
Sure, yeah. Okay, I also wanted to ask you about this latest thing that I listened to from you, the Skatepark Allyship audio artwork. Can you tell me about this project and how the idea kind of started? There's a continuity between like the book that we mentioned before and this project, of course. But I thought it was interesting that it was an audio artwork. I hadn't really, of course, I do a podcast, so I listen to podcasts and music and stuff, but I hadn't quite listened to something like this before. I think I told you when I listened to it, I went to a park here in Paris and just walked around, and I thought it was really interesting and like an immersive and kind of meditative a bit, and it was interesting and well made and food for thought kind of. So tell me about how this whole project started. And
so I was invited to be part of a research team on a project looking at girl skaters' use of skatepark spaces in the north of England, which was headed by some academics from Nottingham Trent Uni. But my involvement with that project was kind of like a bit more, wasn't really very central, but the main thing that I was responsible for on the project was the creation of this audio artwork, which is something I proposed to them when we were planning the project. What I was thinking was, because they were doing interviews with women and girls using the skate parks, I thought it'd be really interesting to create a sort of an artwork that, what I had wanted to do was like something more participatory, where we would work with the interviewees and sort of develop something together. But it didn't work out exactly as we had wanted to because of just the way it worked out.
Okay.
So what happened in the end was that I used the interview transcripts as the basis for creating these fictional characters who are what you hear in the audio artwork.
Right, yeah.
And actually, in hindsight, I mean, both approaches would have been interesting. Like if we'd have done something more participatory with research participants, I think that would have been really interesting. But this was actually, the way it worked out was also really great, really interesting. So what I did was I wrote, the audio artwork has 3 strands. One is, it's a conversation between 3 fictional characters who are talking about what supports them in skate parks. And that is kind of like the allyship info, if you like. And then another strand that kind of weaves into it is this narrator character who is giving the listener cues and instructions for movement in the space that they're in.
Yeah.
And these were instructions that I developed from thinking through the idea of how we occupy skate parks or skate spots, and thinking about trying to change the listener's perspective on the way that they move and getting them to embody a skate park or a skate spot in a different way. And to kind of to feel out of place at times, or to feel strange, and to explore the space in different ways. And then the third strand of the artwork, I employed a very good friend of mine who is an incredible skateboarder and friend from Manchester, Guillaume Dujat. And he's a really great composer, really fantastic. So he created the music, really, that the whole piece hangs on to and creates this beautiful atmosphere around those things. So it was kind of a collaboration between us, and then he brought on actually Lily Holland Freaky, who does the cello pieces in the work as well. And that's it. That's the work.
Are you going to maybe do more of these in the future? Or I assume it's a lot of work and probably takes a bit of time to kind of think about it and then get all the people involved and record it and then edit it and everything. It's a whole process. But I thought it was interesting, and I'm sure this is something, you could probably develop with other themes and everything. So do you think you'll do other ones in the future?
I quite often do work with audio and instructions or scores, so this is quite typical of my artistic practice, and I would like to do some more of these, and I was thinking about that. But at the moment, I'm really keen to get this artwork heard more, and what would be really cool would be to have the QR code embedded, for example, in different spots and sites, and maybe some people will be intrigued enough to listen
give it
to
a listen.
Yeah, so that'd be really cool. But it's definitely a format that I like to use, the audio format.
It's very interesting because it forces you to imagine and put yourself in this situation, and without having an image to kind of tell you everything. And whoever's listening to this interview, I highly recommend they listen to it with headphones and probably go for a walk or skate or something where you can not think too much and just be immersed in it. And it's quite an interesting experience.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we do the friends questions, I have just one last question from me, and that's basically, what's the most valuable lesson you feel you learned from skating?
I think the most valuable thing that I've learned from skating is to not be afraid to be vulnerable and show yourself. I think that is at the very essence of like what skateboarding is about. And that's why it's so difficult, and that's why it can be so intimidating. You're in such a vulnerable position and you're showing yourself in such a profound way. And the process of doing that regularly, I think helps to make you more open and maybe a bit more lighthearted. And that's never a bad thing.
Let's see. Some of them are actually questions that were for you and Sander as we initially planned to do a 3-person interview. So I think this first one is for both of you, but like you can obviously respond to it.
Sander, Dani, Luke Cianciato, I got a couple questions for you both. Firstly, for better or worse, we often have to justify ourselves in the academy in terms of what we're interested in. So why do you feel that skating, an interest in skating, is something that need not be justified in terms of your respective disciplines? That is, why is it something more than a passion or hobby that we kind of collectively share? And secondly, I was curious about how you both balance your relationship in terms of being both a skater as well as an academic. That is it skater first, academic second, or academic first, skater second? Because, it's my feeling that how you make sense of this relationship or this question is pretty informative in terms of both how we participate in a particular space in a moment in time, but then also, whatever sociological or conceptual or theoretical fruits we hope to bear from that participation in that moment or space or process. So, yeah, how do you kind of balance that relationship between both being a skater as well as being an academic? Okay, hope you both are well. I appreciate you both very, very much, as well as you, Quentin. Hope all is good, and take care.
That was Luke Cianciato. I hope I'm saying his name okay. He was part of that panel talk with you at Pushing Borders about academia and skateboarding.
Yeah. I didn't recognize his voice. But
it's hard with the audio. It's not very easy.
Okay, so I think I can answer that. Great questions. Thank you, Luke. I think I can answer kind of across the two questions. So
sure.
What I would say, first of all, is that dance and drama and theatre are already really devalued within the academy.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think get enough value. So I understand and recognise that. I think that in terms of the work that I do, because it's so focused around skateboarding, I think the fact that I'm a skateboarder and that I have this deeply embodied experience of skateboarding is vitally important to my ability to understand that and to get knowledge from this area of practice. And I'm saying that as well because I have had some quite bad experiences in academia where I feel that the expertise that I have from my positionality as a skateboarder was both disregarded and seen as not valuable, but at the same time used extractively by other academics to kind of gain knowledge on this topic.
Okay.
And so I think it's really problematic because historically, when you're exploring a particular something, a phenomenon or activity or whatever it is, historically there's been this kind of focus on objectivity and like the researcher being outside of the thing that is being explored, and that is a somehow kind of neutral position. But of course that's absolutely ridiculous and is not the case because we're all interconnected and we're all part of the dynamic and power structures that exist. So somebody who is not a skateboarder, who is examining skateboarding, might think of themselves as being neutral. In fact, they lack a really important set of implicit markers and insights into that culture that they can't bring to bear on any kind of analysis. And at the same time, they have their own implicit biases around those spaces and those people because they're not skateboarders and because they're taking a different position and standpoint. Yeah. So there's much more of a emphasis now in academia on recognizing your positionality and like where you're coming from and what that brings to bear on the thing that you're doing. Yeah. Other thing that you're researching. So it's vitally important that I'm a skateboarder doing this, and I feel very strongly about that because of the negative experiences that I've had. Mm-hmm. All
right, this next one is from Charlie Davis that we mentioned a few times. So he said, what are you going to do when Nyla shuns the skateboard and picks up some rollerblades?
Nice. Well, you know, I'm very excited by the idea of her roller skating or skateboarding or doing anything at all. So yeah, of course I will support her, whatever she wants to do. Maybe I'll pick up some rollerblades or some roller skates and join her. That would be lovely.
Okay, let's do this one.
So my question for Dani would be, if you could design a skate park, what would be the three main things, the three main obstacles you would put in that skate park to be inclusive to everybody? So, yeah, an inclusive skate park would have three types of designs, and what would they be?
That's a good question. Who's that? I can't work out who that is.
That was Indigo Wheeling.
Oh, it's Indy.
Yes.
Indy. I thought it was Indy, but okay, cool. That's a good question. Okay, my first answer to that question is I wouldn't design a skate park.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is probably going to sound like a bit of a controversial thing to say, but I think that we don't need any more skate parks. And actually, I want to reference here Cousin P, because he said it best the other day on Twitter. So he recently attended a skateboarding event. I think it was in San Francisco, and it was kind of like an academic conference. Luke was there, I think, as well, maybe. And anyway,
I think I heard of it, but wasn't it in San Diego or?
Oh, yeah, it was in San Diego.
Indigo was going there as well, and Paul O'Connor and some other people.
Yeah, and I didn't know anything about it, so I'm not sure what it was called or anything, but basically,
me neither.
He writes in this tweet, a recurring theme from the Stoked sessions, stop burning money by building skate parks, legalise skating in town, especially in neighbourhoods and business districts that shut down after 5 p.m. on weekends. And for different reasons, I think that skate parks shouldn't exist. I don't think that we should have, in a climate crisis and in a time when we really need to be thinking about inclusivity, we shouldn't be building spaces that are for like a single sort of use.
Yes.
Or for one sort of activity. So for me, the idea of the skate park is dead and we don't need any more skate parks. What we need are like spaces that can enable and be activated by all sorts of different activity, whether it's skateboarders or rollerbladers or scooters or bikes or wheelchairs or dancers or whatever it is.
Sure, yeah.
And if I was building a place like that, well, I would probably put in... So there's three things that I think are really wonderful, and they are sliding, swinging, and climbing. So I would create three obstacles that enabled that kind of activity, but by anyone using any kind of equipment, if that makes sense.
Okay. Interesting. No, very interesting what you said also before about, it does make sense. We shouldn't be building brand new skate parks and kind of wasting all this money and energy and concrete on building infrastructures and dedicating them specifically to one activity, and rather just bring skateboarding and all the other things you mentioned to parts of the city where it's most manageable.
Yeah, let's look at what already exists and what urban infrastructure is already there, and then make that more usable for everyone.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Play on.
Okay, this next one is from Chris Lawton, who I had on the podcast not too long ago. So he said, one of the best, most interesting and also kind of surreal stories I've heard is what you've said about your PhD research approach. Dressing in a deliberately, stereotypically over-the-top feminine outfit and playing in public space without a skateboard to observe how the general public reacts to issues of both gender and the notion of play or performance. Do you think anything has changed, for better or worse, in terms of how women and girls are able to play or take space in public areas since you did that research? And what do you think about our collective ability as a community of skate activists to continue to affect change, again, for better or worse?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I think that there's a lot more discussion around inclusivity in public spaces and girls and women's access to those kinds of play spaces. Whether you can draw a line between those things and my PhD is much more difficult to say. But I like to think that I might have contributed in some small way to that shifting sand or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think you can't underestimate the to evoke Henri Lefebvre, you can't underestimate the power of the instant and the thing that happens in a blink of an eye. Somebody doing something unusual in public space, even if it's only very, very temporary, because it's those kinds of moments of play and magic and absurdity that create really little small shifts.
Sure.
And we operate in a world where we're expected to demonstrate impact, especially in academia. It's like this, everyone wants you to be able to say, I did X thing, or I wrote this book, and now the whole world has changed, or this thing has altered, and that's it's just extremely rare for that to happen, and like the reality is that we put things there out into the world in order to try and change them in really small ways, and hopefully they gather enough pace through joining with other things. And so I think that the most important thing that we can do as activists is to have a real intention that we use our energy in a way that generally tries to make change for good. Because then you know that you're like putting your energy into moving things in the right direction.
Okay, let's do this one.
Hello, it's Sophie Friedel from Germany. I also have some questions. The first one goes to Dani. Dani, you're an academic, you're a skateboarder, and recently you have become a mom. And I was wondering how motherhood has changed your outlook on life, on skateboarding maybe, and it would be really nice if you can share some of your experience. Maybe you had insights that would be interesting to know. And then also for Sanda, I know you're quite passionate about it. We talked about it before. Why is it important to bring academia into skateboarding? What are the benefits for skateboarding by doing so? And also, what can academia learn from skateboarding? And then I actually wanted to write to both of you for ages, but never got around doing it. So now it's a wonderful opportunity to ask you. Thank you, Quentin. Will there be another Pushing Borders? Seriously, both events have been the most beautiful conference I've been to. And I know it's a lot of work, but it would be so wonderful if that can happen again. I wish you a wonderful podcast and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sophie. Gosh, lovely. In answer to her question for me, the most profound thing that has happened as a result of becoming a mother is that you just have zero time and zero sleep to operate on. And so all of the stuff that is not important just has to fall by the wayside. And that has been extremely empowering to me. It's really released me from a lot of social anxiety and enabled me to kind of really relax into things. And that's especially with skateboarding, because I really, really don't care anymore about like what I look like or how good I am. Getting the opportunity to go to a skate park and have a bit of a roll around and engage with my body and, play.
Yeah.
It's such a rarely beautiful, wonderful thing. And that's just really helped me to appreciate those kinds of moments. And so that's what I would say. It's wonderful that's come through kind of parenthood, really. And I hope there is another Pushing Borders.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, this next one is from, I hope I'm going to say his name right, Ian Borden?
Ian, yeah.
Oh, he said Ian, okay.
Yeah.
So Ian Borden. So he said, your book, Skateboarding and Femininity, was published in 2020, a year before we saw skateboarding appear in the Tokyo Olympics. So much was made in advance and since that event of the possibilities that the Olympics would open up for females in skateboarding. So now that we are shaping up for skateboarding in the next Olympics, Paris 2024, what are your reflections on this?
I think the Olympics has been really great for women and girls because the increased legitimacy that has shone upon skateboarding, if you like, has meant that, of course, women and girls are much more spotlighted by organisations and companies and funders and all of those things. So there seems to be, because of the way the Olympics operates and that need for a kind of different genders to be represented, or certainly men and women to be not all genders to be represented, but anyway. Then that means that there's been a lot more support for women and girls, I think, in general, and that's filtered down, which is really good. But at the same time, the Olympics isn't perfect and isn't open to all genders and still perpetuates a lot of inequalities, I suppose, and tends to be focused on people who have the capital and the resources to sort of enter into those fields. So it's good, but what we really need is more support at the grassroots level for, Chris Lawton can tell you as well. The need for more support at that very that basic community level for skateboarding.
Absolutely. Very true. Okay, let's do this one.
Hello, Dani. Having worked with you in interesting circumstances, what would you say your experience has been as a part academic, part arts practitioner, and how would you describe that journey?
So that was Badir Bikar.
Oh, as an academic and an arts practitioner, it's a tricky one to kind of connect. I think that the audio artwork Skatepark Allyship is a great example of sort of where those two things converge in quite a nice way.
Yeah.
But also, Badir and I are working on a project in Plymouth at the moment, and that is, I think, just so beautiful and wonderful. And it's sort of skatable sculptures coming to Plymouth Civic Centre.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that. And I think finding those points where that kind of creative work can happen, that really brings together the inquiry or the research that is related to kind of use of public space or play and inclusivity with that sort of like wonderful creative realm of like creating an artwork and kind of designing an artwork in some way. When those two things do come together, it's so magical, but it's quite hard to find them.
Yeah.
So I'm working a lot in collaboration with other people and who can help to manifest those ideas is really important. That's why I really appreciate Badir very much, because he's a very wonderful, creative person and feel very grateful to know him.
Yeah. When will this happen, you think, this project in Plymouth?
Yeah, hopefully it will be the end of June to the end of July that the project is scheduled, but we're having some issues around the sort of dates for it at the moment, so it's a bit tricky to pin that down anymore.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it. I'll definitely share whatever you guys put out. Absolutely.
Great. I'll let you know.
Cool. Okay, I have just a few last ones. So this one is from Sander, who we were initially going to have this conversation with. And hopefully I'll do one with him as well soon. So he said, Dani, it's so wonderful that Quentin is having a chat with you. Cal Beachy and Alexis Sablone are currently running a course on skateboarding. They read your book, Skateboarding and Femininity, a couple of weeks ago. How did you feel when you found out one of the skaters you write about is now reading your work and discussing it with students? I didn't know about that. I thought it was really cool. Yeah,
so Kyle contacted me about this because, oh my God, they're doing the most amazing course and they're running the most amazing course and it just sounds absolutely dreamy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that they're engaging with my book and is just a completely unreal dream thing and it's just amazing. And I would absolutely love to take that course, and I said that to Kyle, and it was really inspiring to hear about it. It really made my creative juices start to flow. So
yeah, for sure.
It'd be good to really awesome to do something like that in the UK.
Okay, let's do this one.
Hello, mate. Cheers for the reminder. So I guess here's a good one for Dani. So ask her about her introduction to skateboard forums. She used to come and post on the old Sidewalk forum, I think not long after she first got into skating. And although some of it might have been a bit toxic, I think she found it quite an interesting community and it was probably quite a strange way to get your head into skateboarding, if that makes sense. She'll know what I mean anyway. If you just ask her about her past as a forum lurker, that might get a good response.
That's Ben Powell, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, and so he's asking me to reflect on the forum.
Yes, exactly. You kind of touched on it earlier. You talked about skateboarding forums when we first started this conversation, I think.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I was thinking about the forum this morning. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was both a really beautiful environment. I mean, I loved interacting with everyone. But yeah, at times it was a bit mean, a bit toxic.
Mm-hmm.
But I really appreciated people that I met through the forum. I met some absolutely incredible people in real life, both and online. So on reflection, I think it was an absolutely critical, wonderful and important part of my skateboarding history. And I think for most people involved, warts and all with it. And one of the things about it that I do think is important is that you've got to it is good for everyone to have space to express themselves, even if those opinions are really bad ones, or even if those opinions are like really problematic. Because actually when you get everything out in the open, at least you can kind of like discuss things. And I appreciated the support I got from people like Ben on that forum, and Claire Allium as well, and Laura Powell, who was a forum lurker, and other people. And so as long as those spaces, as long as people feel able to call out that sort of behaviour and call out comments and to be supportive of other people, they function really in quite an interesting way, I think. But yeah, they can be tricky.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just want to say that one of the people I met, I went over to Los Angeles for a couple of weeks on my own a few years ago, and as a result of that got to contact people on the forum and said I was going to be there, and made a connection with a skateboarder who was from the UK but lives in Los Angeles. He's an artist as well, really, really amazing and interesting person, called Oliver Payne. And I ended up meeting up with him for a skate, and I just have to say this because he's good friends with a famous skateboarder called Mike Manzori from the 90s, in particular, 2000s, from London, who's also now in Los Angeles. And basically they're friends, and so when I met up for a skate with him, he invited Mike to come out for a skate, and like neither of them were aware at all of like how much I was obsessed with Mike Manzori when I was like 16 or 17, and I just thought he was an absolutely wonderful skater with a fantastic style, and just like loved him and tried to emulate him and dress like him. And suddenly I was like in Los Angeles skating in a car park with him, and I was just, it was too much for my like adolescent brain to take.
Process,
it was just like me trying to do these really crappy slappy grinds on a curb, and like Mike Manzori is here.
Yeah, must be intimidating. But
there you go. So that's what the forum can do.
It's a good demonstration right there.
Yeah.
Okay, I have just two quick last ones. This one is from Adelina Ong, who was also part of the panel talk in Malmö. So she said, looking back at the past year, what's one thing that you've learned about yourself that surprised you?
At the past year?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. I'm actually quite surprised at how resilient I can be. I didn't realise, I always thought of myself as being quite a bit useless in that sense. As soon as the going gets tough, I kind of crumble. But the going got quite tough in the last year in lots of ways, and I feel like I'm actually a lot more resilient than I thought I was. So that's a nice thing to kind of know, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Adelina. That's a nice question.
Okay, very last one.
Assalamu alaikum, Dani. كيف حالك? Hope you're doing well. I want to ask you, what do you think is the next step for the skateboarding scene in the Palestine should be?
Oh, is that Aram?
That was Aram, yeah.
Well, what I want to see is all of the new skaters, the skaters that are like coming up in Palestine who have just been skating for a few years and developing their practice. I want to see them take control of the scene and really take it in the direction that they want to go, because there are some really amazing people, and I would love to see that. I would love to see what Palestinian skaters do with that. And the ways that they kind of like shape a scene for themselves that we can all learn from.
Yeah, it's a great way to end it. Thank you so much, Dani.
Thank you so much. It's really good to talk to you.
That's it for my conversation with Dani. Follow her on Instagram at SkeeterDani, SkeeterDani. Visit her website daniabulhawa.com to check out some of the multiple projects she's worked on so far, including her book Skateboarding and Femininity and the Skatepark Allyship audio artwork we talked about throughout our conversation. Lastly, visit skatepal.co.uk to support their amazing work towards the youth in Palestine. Thank you for tuning in. See you soon for a new episode of Beyond Boards.